Okay, man, we're back.
OG podcast, episode 2.
Episode 2.
So start us off with that. What you do sometimes with your teaching role.
Oh yeah, I sort of alluded to the sneakiness. I'll show up, and sometimes I'll sit next to students, or I don't present myself as the instructor first. I'll show up and sit down, or start talking to somebody, or whatever. And I don't do this every year, but I have done it some years, and it's been interesting to see sometimes the response to me, because sometimes oh, okay, well, when I get up to walk to the front, it's like, oh my gosh, you're the person who's going to be here. And sometimes I found it to be positively exciting, but sometimes I've seen students be like, oh, like maybe a bit of shock. And so I try not to judge what that is, because I don't know the person. I literally just met them or just seen them, but I just, as a social experiment, it's quite interesting. Also, sometimes at the beginning of every semester, when I walk in the door, folks from the Student Association, they don't know me personally. And sometimes they'd say, hey, you want to sign up for dental services, or they're offering me the student things. And I'm like, no, thanks. So that's also interesting. Anyway.
Yeah. And the reason that we start with that is today we want to unpack further that our identities as minorities, but this time discussing the ability to thrive in that space and the advantages of being a minority in a space that may be dominated by a majority, but how we can also leverage that and how it's played out in our lives where we've been able to have experiences like that, but at the same time thrive in spite of it.
Absolutely. Well said. I think that's talks about this, and I think oftentimes we talk about how our minority says negative things happen to us, but in this case, I found on the positive side, I show up, and I said this before, and I'm not sure if I meant it positively or negatively, but sometimes I'm the first person of color or Black person who's been in a position of authority above some folks. And that's not necessarily a negative thing. To me, it's maybe relative representation, because I'm not someone with my identity is not typically represented in this role. I think it's refreshing to see that. And also, students now, they get a chance to be exposed to somebody who represents that identity and get to know them for who they are, as opposed to just a caricature or something that they don't really know, they hear about, they see, but they never experience.
How long do you think it takes an average student, from your experience, to get into, for a lack of a better term, flow state with you, where like there's that barrier is gone? If there was a barrier of any sort, that barrier is now gone. We're just interacting like a traditional student to professor/teacher relationship.
It's an interesting question, because I've tried to actually address that in some way over the past few years. And by that, I mean this. In the past 2 or 3 years, I now have a sort of a speech, a monologue, where I say that...
A
monologue, where I say, okay, you know what? I'm going to ask you to do a bunch of things. We're going to talk about mental health. We're going to talk about, giving you the chance to be vulnerable. But I understand that we just met. I haven't earned your trust yet. So I'm asking you to trust.
That's a two-way street too.
Exactly.
Right?
So I put that out right at the beginning. I'm saying all this, and I want to acknowledge that you may not trust me yet. So I'm asking you to do your best, trust the process. And I found that since I started doing that little monologue, I found anecdotally that to happen a little bit faster, because it's changed with other things. That monologue, it comes from the fact that I've now built in other activities and things that are designed to bring out that brave space, the safeness of the discussion, whereas before I didn't mention those things explicitly. I just tried to engage with them. And now that I mention it, talk about it, describe the construct, and then try to model it, it happens usually within, to answer your question in the short way, within the first week or two, as opposed to a month or so.
Yeah, and I think that's huge when it comes to, if you can cut any process down, if we're to ratio that's 75% of the time. Even though like the difference between a month and a month and a week isn't that exponential when it comes to the grand scheme of life. When you're limited to interactions to once to twice a week with this person through a 8 to 16 week race, every one of those interactions really count.
They absolutely do. That's because my program it's condensed, and I do have a limited amount of time for them. So if I can shave a little bit of that anxiety, anticipation, not knowing from, 3 or 4 weeks down to 1, maybe 2, I think you get the ball rolling a little faster. And that's essentially what I want them to do, is because we have such limited time. Sooner you get buy-in intrinsically, I think the better results you'll get going forward.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And so from flipping that to the opposite side of the coin, being someone who is a minority, speaking from a student perspective, growing up as a minority in the English speaking community, I always was my touch point when it came to writing and communicating wasn't the traditional ones of, grade 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I first remember being able to like be coherent in English writtenly in like grade 6. So in order to get there was an unconventional path. Like instead of having more conversations, there was a lot of obsessively reading things that I found interesting. So therefore, which included a lot of magazines, which didn't write always in structured language. It was a lot of, there's more freedom in how you write in like something like Sports Illustrated. But when I was growing up. So then when I got older and I beginning to want to continue to pursue writing, and I continue to be as strong of a writer as I can, I met a lot of resistance from a teacher we didn't have that trust in grade 12 English. I'm not going to put her on blast, but this was the relationship we had, where she continually said like, I don't want it to be done this way because it's outside of the box. And she was near retirement at that time, so I've been doing it for a certain way for a segmented amount of time. When you speak to a 17-year-old that way, I wasn't in a position to give her pushback, but at the same time, my way of pushing back was, I'm going to keep doing this thing this way because it allows me to push my own boundaries of writing about insert book that we're reading here in a way that's not the cookie cutter way that's going to yield maximum marks. So I sacrifice having best mark for challenging myself to express myself in a way that I found more authentic.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think culturally, there may be some difference between yourself and the teacher. And I think what is right and appropriate and what it's supposed to be or cookie cutter is relative to your cultural view and perspective, right? Because I'm from this culture and we do things this way, writing. You're from that culture, you do things this way. And you're describing some nuance. I'm here, I'm an immigrant, but I'm learning English through much more freedom, colloquial style writing versus literary prose and things where there's a really structure. And I think that presented, what I hear is there's a fear response that teaches. I don't know how to deal with things that are outside of this container that
How do I mark this?
So as opposed to opening my mind and learning more, I'm at the stage, maybe I'm on the way out. I'm going to just tell you to rein yourself in and mute yourself and stay within the confines of this, essentially conform if you want good marks from me. And you decided that one thing was more important than the other, and the thing that was being more authentic was better than trying to achieve or to conform to a standard so you can get an accolade that doesn't really mean as much to you as being authentic. Yeah, makes any sense.
And I think there's a line as well in all relationships. I think meeting in the middle is dangerous, but at the same time, it's about meeting at a certain point, though. It can't be all me. This is how I want to do it. I'm driving it this way. There was still a hint of, okay, this is the structure of how it's needed to be. But how I achieve things within the structure, I have autonomy over. And I think that transfers over to any discipline of life. Like if you're doing things so outside of what is permissible and what is expected, then that's just BS.
It can have troubles, yeah.
but then if you're staying in the lane but you're expressing yourself in the lane, I think that's where the beauty happens, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that lane is defined by lots of different things.
Make a wider lane.
Right?
Drive a different truck, or instead of driving a convertible, drive a truck. Yeah, I go off with the metaphors, but please go.
But no, I just think that coming back to being someone who's being viewed as a visible minority. Also, if you're saying, okay, well, this is my culture, I'm going to lead into it more. My culture, not just my historical culture, but I think who I am now. I've arrived here. I consume this. I'm trying to produce something. All of that is relative to who I am. So I'm going to do. And I think that has its power too, especially when you have a dominant culture that is different from your own, that you're saying, okay, you know what? I understand what this is. I understand what's expected, but I'm going to inject my own thing into this, in this domain. And I think your perspective being a visible minority and the culture that's related to that has the power to create nuance or difference where one wouldn't necessarily be seen because the cookie cutter doesn't view things from your perspective, right?
And innovation also takes time to, as we go into the final part of this, innovation takes time to accept. I think that's the idea that you and I spoke on before, was that Stephen Curry in the basketball space has weaponized a three-point shot to where it's become, the stat I looked up is from the 2014 season, so 10 years ago, the average NBA team took 21 per game. This past year, in 2023 to 2024, the average team took 35.
Big jump.
So 14 increase, but the percentage has actually remained stable. So we've used that idea more and we've weaponized it, and because of Steph Curry. But initially, because of Steph Curry and others, of course, but he's the main driver of it. But the first couple of years before it became successful, people didn't want to mess with that. Let's continue to play through the big man. We use the 3-pointer exclusively to create better looks on the inside or in the mid range. Yeah, just overall, have you ran into any other ideas that are similar to that, where change really takes time and it also takes proof of concept?
100%. I think what you're describing is that sometimes it's not something that's new or novel isn't viewed as innovation. It's viewed as threat. So if you show up and you do something different, whoa, hey man, what's going on? Versus, okay, you have to, so Steph Curry showed up, did the work, obviously to practice, to start to hit those and show that, hey, I'm going to use this as a primary weapon as opposed to a segue to create some other play. I intend to score this often, right? And so people are like, oh, that doesn't fit with what we do, but then they see that it maybe has some utility and it works. And so in the educational space, even just in sort of creating my classroom here, the thing I did was that when I turned it to what we call blended, where I insisted that people had the choice of coming in or out, it was like, whoa, can we do that? I'm like, yes. And so it took a while. I wrote papers, I shared with people. People didn't really bite, and it didn't really take on the larger significance until the pandemic. When the pandemic hit, it was like, I told my students, okay, don't come here. Nothing else changed. Whereas other folks had to rejig, rework, and figure out. And so it was in that, to answer your question, yes, sometimes innovation is viewed in a way that is not that's innovative versus that's not how we do it. Can we do it? I'm not sure if that's going to work. It's best if we just lean into what we have been doing and maybe tinker around the edges a little bit. And I'm a person who maybe we'll tinker around the edges, but if we tinker around the edges, what are we going to get? I'd rather just tear the thing down and build it back up given the goal we want to achieve, as opposed to always trying to modify something that we already have in order to make it fit into something that we want. I think there's reasons for both, but I'm more leaning toward the side. I'd rather tear it down and build it back up, and now it's bespoke for the thing that we need versus the other way.
Yeah, in this case, we've been discussing that's the ideology of an idea or a structure being in the minority and wanting to thrive, and for it to thrive so well that it becomes what's commonplace. I think instead of just saying we began this conversation by saying we're visible minorities physically, but when it comes to intellectually, how we do things, how you think about something and how it shows up in the physical space, there are also many, many examples throughout human history of there's a limiting belief that we as society have. Let's not do it this way. 3-pointer or a blended educational delivery system. To me, those are parallel. And it takes one moment or one period of time where it's shown to be successful, and then it becomes everyone, let's do it, and then everyone's trying to catch up.
Someone's got to blaze the trail, right? And it's a little bit harder to be the trailblazer, and sometimes I like that, and sometimes I don't, right? But for me, I don't know if I'm going to compare myself to Steph Curry, but for me, I knew we could do the thing. I knew it would work. I knew how to do it. I had to do the practice, the work, the setup, and then execute on it. And I think in that vein, maybe he felt the same way. You know what? I can do this. This shot's easy for me to get with the high consistency. So I'm going to show that I can do it. And if I show and prove, then people are like, oh, okay, actually that does work. And I think that inspires other folks to do the same because they know that it works, and you just have to do some of the work that he did. Yeah. That's it. We're done like that too.
I think that's perfect.
No. I'm just joking. It's fine.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think that's perfect.
That's cool.
We'll see you in the next episode.
Okay.